Some interesting points made here in this article talking about all the mainstream media topics that point in the direction of a massive wall of water hitting the West Coast, and then looking at some scientific data as well here and showing that, of course, the big one could rock California, but what would it really do in terms of the geography? Well, that kind of depends on what unzips where things go down, if we're talking about the San Andreas or if we're talking about the Cascadia, for instance. We also have to factor in the Hayward Fault and the new information that was just published in terms of that. This is critical because what this is saying, and you even have scientists and professors from these universities coming out and saying the same thing, that if that fault gets hit with a big enough quake, half of the land right there on the coast could almost instantly go into the ocean. Not just one, two, but several are pointing at this now and saying that this is what could happen. And they're saying it's going to be hard to prepare for an event like a big earthquake that hits on land that causes an underwater avalanche, so to speak, where, say there's a slope right there on the coastline, that earthquake could make that slope break loose. All that land underwater shifting downward would cause a massive tsunami wave. And they're saying that some of the low-lying areas around Los Angeles are going to feel the brunt of this if a quake was to hit there. Now, they also bring up some points that this massive earthquake just hit Indonesia, and the mainstream media didn't want to talk much of it, which I find kind of unusual. The land was going up and down over there, and then this massive wall of water making its way into the area, devastating everything in its path. But I find it kind of odd that the mainstream just didn't talk much of it. You know, when the tsunami had hit Haiti, we had heard about it and seen the footage, seen the waves coming through. Japan, we all witnessed the footage. But in terms of this event, as disastrous as it was, the mainstream just kind of turned a cheek to the whole thing. It's no secret. A big quake is going to hit Cali at some point and it's going to cripple it. There's just too much going on there fundamentally, along with the supervolcano, the caldera, in its chamber filling with magma as well. You've got a situation in California where not only is there fault lines, but it's there on the Ring of Fire with not just dormant volcanoes, but you're talking a supervolcano, the Long Valley caldera. And if that thing was to go, it would be almost a death trap for people on the West Coast. Anyone between there and the coastline, how things would unravel from there, it would be very interesting. What would a massive earthquake do near that volcano? What would an eruption do in terms of affecting the fault lines? You know, if you saw an event pop off where they go hand in hand, that would be very disastrous. And I just don't like the idea of any area being susceptible to sliding off into the ocean because of where it sits. And as they talk about here about the Hayward Fault and all the information that they've just discovered and published here recently, people just seem to not be aware of this. In Southern California, an underwater avalanche in the Santa Monica Bay could produce a tsunami that can inundate low-lying areas of Santa Monica, South Bay, and Manhattan Beach, also affecting Hermosa Beach and Redondo Beach. Just from that one little area, seeing an underwater displacement of land. They're saying that the first waves could show up within 10 minutes. And this means that a warning system may not reach people at all, depending on where it hit and how it hit. They've been saying the Cascadia is capable of producing a magnitude 9. if it was to happen further north into California, along this line, it could produce a wall of water up to 80 foot high. You're talking affecting the Oregon coastline, Washington coastline. So the whole west coast comes into play there. The Juan de Fuca, we've talked about that plate all the way up to British Columbia. How all those plates are kind of interconnected there. And we've seen in the past the swarming in different areas. And I think personally, seeing the decent 5 to 6 magnitude quakes offshore that do no damage, I think that's good to release some of that energy, because the longer we go without a release of energy, the greater the odds are of seeing a higher magnitude earthquake that could trigger a large tsunami. But it seems to be ticker taped into everything here by the mainstream media in preparing for such an event, a massive tsunami hitting the West Coast. Now, of course, like I said, this is an area that is more active in terms of earthquakes and volcanic activity compared to the East Coast that sees very little quake activity and obviously is not sitting on the ring of fire. So, with all those factors in play, California, some parts of it, I would say within the next 100 years will cease to exist, because I do believe within that time frame it will see the big quake. And how people handle it, that's in their hands. We always say have a plan, especially if you're in an earthquake-prone area. If you're on a beach line, have a tsunami plan, have an earthquake plan. If you do, your odds of surviving it are that much better. I'm going to leave a link. Make sure to tune in to Underground World News Live Friday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, Dabu 77.